I never thought the worst day of my career would start like any other Tuesday. It was March when Mr. Collins, our regional operations director, sent a message to the whole floor. All warehouse and logistics staff, conference room B, 9 o'clock. No reason given. Daniel Ware, had worked at Hargrove Distribution for 11 years. I started moving boxes and checking inventory sheets. Over time, I became senior logistics coordinator. I knew every shelf number, every supplier code, and every delivery window by heart. People called me the walking manual. That morning, I arrived at 7:30 as always. I checked overnight delivery reports and spoke briefly with Ray at the loading dock. Everything felt completely normal. No warning, no bad feeling. At 9 o'clock, I walked into conference room B and took my usual seat. My manager, Mr. Victor Hale, stood at the front with his arms crossed and jaw tight. The moment I sat down, his eyes landed on me and stayed there. Executives I rarely saw at floor-level meetings stood along the back wall. That was very unusual. I should have known then. I really should have known. The room filled quickly. People shuffled in with coffee cups, speaking in low voices. The executives at the back made everyone visibly uneasy. Mr. Hale cleared his throat. The room went quiet. The Whitmore account had placed a bulk pharmaceutical order on the 14th of last month, he said. The order was worth over $200,000 and was due at their regional hub by the 21st. It did not arrive. Murmurs spread through the room. The shipment was delayed 6 days. Whitmore had a strict delivery clause and was now threatening to cancel their contract, which represented nearly 12% of quarterly revenue. After a full internal review, he continued, the source of the failure had been identified. The breakdown happened at the coordination level. The senior logistics coordinator responsible had failed to follow the proper approval chain before releasing the order. He did not say my name, but every single person in that room turned to look at me. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands were flat on the table. I kept my face still and said nothing, because saying something would have broken me open in front of 30 people. I want you to understand who I was before that morning. Not for sympathy, but because what happened next only makes sense when you know what I had given that company. I joined Hargrove at 26 with barely $40 in my bank account. I spent my first 2 years learning the warehouse floor completely, memorizing supplier contacts and staying late most Fridays helping teammates close out their weekly reports. In my 4th year, a coordinator named Sandra Ames was struggling badly. Personal problems at home had caused her error rate to climb. Mr. Hale had flagged her for review. Without telling anyone, I quietly began checking her work before it went out, catching mistakes before they became serious problems. She did not lose her job. She recovered fully. She thanked me privately once. I told her it was nothing. Over the years, I covered extra holiday shifts, trained for new hires, and absorbed overflow tasks from understaffed departments. I did all of this without asking for extra pay or a title change. When Mr. Hale pointed at me in that meeting room, the man he was pointing at had quietly held his department together for over a decade. He had benefited from my work for years. Now he was using it against me. What Mr. Hale understood, and had used carefully over 4 years, was that I did not like conflict. Whenever a supplier made a mistake, I fixed it quietly rather than escalating. When executives sent requests that made no logistical sense, I found a way to make them work. When someone above me took credit for a solution I had created, I let it go. I told myself it was professionalism, that results mattered more than recognition. But the truth was simpler. I had grown up in a home where arguments led somewhere bad, and somewhere along the way I decided that staying quiet was the safest choice a person could make. Mr. Hale had watched this for 4 years. He saw me absorb pressure the way dry ground absorbs rain. He watched me take ownership of problems that were not entirely mine. He came to believe very confidently that I would keep doing it regardless of what happened. He was not a builder. He was a man who positioned himself near things others had already built and let people assume he had built them. His career had been one long exercise in credit-taking and blame-shifting. I had been his most useful tool. I just had not seen it clearly until that morning. After the meeting, I sat at my desk and reconstructed the Whitmore timeline from memory. The order arrived on the 12th of February. A large pharmaceutical batch, temperature sensitive, requiring refrigerated freight and a confirmed delivery window. I received the order summary and began coordination immediately. On the 13th, I submitted the shipment request to Mr. Hale for review and approval. Standard procedure. No shipment over $50,000 could be released without a senior manager's sign-off. I had followed this process without exception for 11 years. I waited 2 days. No response. On the 15th, I sent a follow-up, noting the tight delivery window. On the 17th, I sent a second follow-up. On the 18th, a Friday, Mr. Hale replied briefly, "Proceed as planned. I'll log the approval on Monday." I took that as authorization and released the shipment to the freight carrier. What I did not know was that the formal approval field in our logistics software showed no digital sign-off from him. His email existed in my inbox, but the system record was blank. When the carrier caused a delay, that blank approval field became the evidence, and it pointed entirely at me. 3 days after the meeting, the corporate audit team arrived. There were 2 of them. Ms. Patricia Voss had sharp eyes and asked questions that made every word feel weighed. Her colleague Thomas Okeke took careful notes on a slim tablet and rarely looked up. They set up near the executive floor and called people in one at a time. I was called on the second day. Ms. Voss asked me to walk through my handling of the Whitmore shipment. I explained every step, every date, every message I had sent to Mr. Hale. I told her about the blank approval field and the email reply authorizing me to proceed. I told her I had a copy. She wrote something down. Then she said, "Mr. Ware, in the system logs, there is no record of an approval request submitted on the 13th. The first record of your involvement is dated the 18th, the same day the shipment was released." "That cannot be right," I said. "I submitted that request on the 13th. I have my sent items record." She nodded slowly. "We will look at those records. But based on what the system currently shows, the timeline does not support your account." I left that room feeling cold from the inside. Someone had altered the records. The week after the auditors arrived, the social temperature at work shifted completely. People who had eaten lunch with me for years found reasons to be busy. Colleagues I had personally trained walked past my desk without making eye contact. The break room went quiet when I entered and picked back up when I left. I understood it. When a company reviews someone for a major failure, nobody wants to be seen as that person's ally. I had stayed silent myself when it happened to others. Now I was on the receiving end, and it was lonelier than I had imagined. One person was different. Sandra Ames stopped by my desk on Thursday morning. She placed a coffee cup next to my keyboard and said quietly, "I haven't forgotten what you did for me. If there is anything I can tell them that would help, I will." I thanked her and told her to be careful. Later I noticed something about Clarence Webb, who managed warehouse inventory records and had worked at Hargrove for over 20 years. He had not avoided me like the others. There was something behind his eyes whenever we passed in the hallway, less like distance and more like a decision he had not yet made. I filed that away and kept moving. Clarence Webb was 61 years old and had worked in the Hargrove warehouse since before the building had a second floor. Same 3 shirts in rotation, same lunch every day, and he spoke only when he had something worth saying. What most people did not know was that Clarence kept handwritten records. A set of hardcover notebooks with black and white marbled covers, logging every delivery, every approval form through the physical receiving area, every signature on a paper dispatch sheet. He had been doing this since a system crash years earlier wiped out 3 weeks of digital inventory data and nearly cost the company a major supplier contract. After that, he decided he would never rely on one system alone. Nobody in management paid attention to the notebooks. They were considered an old man's habit in an era of cloud-based platforms. On Friday afternoon, Clarence appeared around a shelving aisle corner and stopped in front of me. He looked left and right, then lowered his voice. "I keep records. You know that?" he said. "I've heard," I replied. He studied my face for a long moment. "Come find me when you're ready, but be quiet about it." He turned and walked back toward inventory without another word. My heart was beating faster than it had in days. While I quietly gathered my facts, Mr. Hale was busy building his version of the story. I heard things through walls and through people who did not realize how loudly they spoke. He had been telling executives that I was difficult to manage, skipped process steps regularly, and that he had warned me multiple times about the approval chain. He painted a portrait of a reckless employee who believed 11 years of service gave him the right to cut corners. He also told at least 2 executives that he had asked me on the 15th to verify the Whitmore approval status and that I had confirmed everything was in order. Complete lie. I had messaged him for his approval and he had not responded. But he said it with confidence, and confidence is convincing. By the end of that week, the unofficial story at Hargrove had already been written. Ware had rushed a major shipment without authorization. Someone needed to answer for it. The executives scheduled a formal review hearing for the following Friday. A written notice arrived on my desk Thursday afternoon. It stated the hearing would determine whether disciplinary action, including possible termination, was warranted. I was invited to present my account and any supporting documentation. 7 days. I had exactly 7 days. Some people might expect that during those days I was falling apart. There were moments like that, and I will not pretend otherwise. But something else was happening alongside the fear. A quiet, specific focus. I had learned early in my career that panic is expensive. It burns time and energy and produces nothing except more panic. What problems require is a slow, careful inventory of what you know and what you still need to find. So I made a list. I knew I had submitted the approval request on the 13th. My email records proved it. I knew Mr. Hale had replied on the 18th with authorization. That email was still in my inbox. I knew the system logs had been altered because the timeline they showed was impossible. And I knew Clarence kept physical records that predated the digital system upgrade from 3 years earlier. The question was whether his records covered the Whitmore period and whether a physical routing slip had survived. On Monday at lunch, I found Clarence near the loading dock. We spoke quietly for 8 minutes. He told me his February notebook contained entries for the Whitmore order and that the routing slips were still in a folder. He had not touched them since the investigation began. He had been waiting to see if someone would come looking. Clarence had 17 notebooks in a locked metal cabinet in his narrow warehouse office. He pulled out the one dated January through March and opened it to the 14th of February. His careful handwriting read, Whitmore Pharmaceuticals batch order. Standard process. Temp-controlled freight confirmed. Physical dispatch request form received and filed. Authorization form includes standard approval routing slip with department manager signature field. Pending. That entry confirmed the physical paperwork had existed and that the order had gone through the normal process without being rushed or bypassed. But there was more. He turned to the 18th of February. Whitmore dispatch authorization finalized. Physical routing slip signed and returned to logistics coordination. Full signature chain confirmed. Do you still have the actual routing slip? I asked. He opened a lower drawer and pulled out a flat folder. Inside were routing slips filed in date order. He thumbed through them, stopped, and placed one on the table. The slip was dated the 18th of February. At the bottom, in the manager approval field, was a signature. Victor Hale's signature. I stood very still for a moment, looking at it. In 11 years of believing that staying quiet and doing good work would be enough, this was the first time I felt something I can only describe as relief so sharp it almost hurt. Sandra Ames called me the following evening. She had been interviewed as part of the general staff review and wanted to tell me what she had shared before she lost her nerve. She spoke quickly. She told the auditors something she had witnessed in late January, 3 weeks before the Whitmore order came in. She was working late in the coordination room when she overheard Mr. Hale on a phone call. She heard him mention the Whitmore account and the phrase "we can use this window." She had not understood it then. After everything that happened, the memory felt very different. She also told them about a meeting she accidentally walked into in early February. Mr. Hale and a man from the IT systems team named Adrian Cross both went quiet when she entered. She grabbed the binder she came for and left. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Adrian Cross was the team member responsible for maintaining the logistics management software. Sandra told me she had submitted a formal written statement to the auditors. She sounded scared. I told her she had done the right thing. After the call, I sat in the dark for a few minutes. Quietly helping Sandra years ago had produced a witness I never could have manufactured. By Wednesday, I learned through 2 separate sources that Mr. Hale was confident. He had told someone on the leadership team the hearing was basically a formality. The evidence was clean, the timeline was documented, and the only question was whether I would be terminated immediately or placed on probation first. He lobbied for immediate termination, arguing that keeping me on would send the wrong signal to the Whitmore negotiators. He also submitted a memo requesting that any documentation I planned to present be reviewed in advance by the compliance team so it could be properly contextualized. In plain language, he wanted advance warning of what I intended to show. That request was declined. The auditors insisted all evidence be presented simultaneously at the hearing. That refusal was a small but important crack. Because what Mr. Hale could not have known was the state of Clarence Webb's notebooks, or the physical routing slip sitting undisturbed in that narrow warehouse office. He had covered his digital trail with precision, working with Adrian Cross to clean the system logs and build a timeline he believed was airtight. He had not accounted for an old man with a marbled notebook who had never fully trusted computers. Friday was coming, and Mr. Hale was celebrating 5 days too early. I need to tell you about the day I helped Clarence because it connects to everything that followed. About 2 years before the Whitmore incident, a system upgrade went wrong and corrupted several weeks of receiving logs. The warehouse floor was in chaos. Orders were held and carriers were waiting. Clarence had been trying to get someone in management to listen. He kept saying his physical records could bridge the gap. Nobody paid attention. He was, to most people, just an old warehouse man with an outdated habit. I was passing through the dock area when I saw him near the dispatch board, notebook open, speaking to a supervisor who had already turned away. I stopped and asked what he had. He showed me. I understood immediately what those records were worth. I took him upstairs and stood beside him while he explained his system to the logistics director. The gap was filled and the orders moved within 4 hours instead of 3 days. At the all-staff meeting that followed, the logistics director thanked the IT team. Nobody mentioned Clarence. I stayed after and told her directly that Clarence's records had been the actual solution. I doubt she formally noted it, but Clarence had heard me say it, and he remembered for 2 years. On Thursday, the day before the hearing, Ms. Voss asked to meet with me privately. She sat across from me with her tablet in front of her and a printed folder beside it. She said the investigation had uncovered inconsistencies in the system records and that the audit team had formally requested communication logs between Mr. Hale and the IT systems team. Then she said something that revealed more than she probably intended. "Mr. Ware, do you have any physical documentation related to the Whitmore shipment that you have not yet submitted?" I told her I did. She leaned forward slightly. "Can you make that available for tomorrow's hearing?" I said yes, and that I would also need to bring a witness who could speak to the origin and reliability of the records. She wrote on her tablet. Then she said, "Have everything ready by 8:30. The hearing begins at 9. I thanked her and stood to leave. At the door I stopped. "Ms. Voss," I said, "before tomorrow, I would suggest you request the physical routing slip archive from the warehouse receiving office, specifically the slip dated the 18th of February. She looked at me steadily, then wrote it down without asking how I knew. I walked back to my desk with the first solid footing I had felt in 2 weeks. Late Thursday afternoon, the investigation produced something none of us had anticipated. In reviewing the communication logs between Mr. Hale and Adrian Cross, the auditors found messages exchanged on the 23rd of February, 2 days after the Whitmore delay became public. The messages discussed the problem of an approval request that appeared in the logistics team's outgoing records but showed no corresponding entry in the manager review queue. The messages showed Cross explaining how a review queue entry could be removed without triggering a system alert, provided it was done within a specific window by someone with administrative access. Cross had that access. Mr. Hale did not, but he had access to the person who did. The auditors then found something larger. Internal documents showed that 3 months earlier, Mr. Hale had submitted a formal recommendation to eliminate the senior logistics coordinator role in a restructuring, replacing it with a new role reporting directly to him. The recommendation had been set aside, but it documented his intention clearly. He had wanted my position gone for months. When the Whitmore shipment was delayed due to a carrier scheduling error, he recognized an opportunity. He used that window exactly as Sandra had heard him say, and Hargrove's own records had documented every step of it. Friday arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully and arrived at 8:15. I brought my folder of emails, a printed copy of my formal account, and nothing else. Clarence Webb arrived shortly after with his February notebook and the routing slip in a plain envelope. Sandra had submitted her written statement the day before. Conference room B was full by 9 o'clock. The executives were seated this time, not standing at the back. Ms. Voss and Thomas Okeke sat at the side with materials organized neatly. Mr. Hale sat at the front, posture controlled, expression composed in the way people look when they believe they have already won. Ms. Voss opened the hearing and explained it would cover the Whitmore timeline, the approval chain, and newly discovered evidence. Both Mr. Hale and I would present our accounts. Mr. Hale went first. He spoke for about 12 minutes. His version was polished and detailed. A coordinator who operated too independently, communicated poorly, and released a major shipment without authorization. Calm, specific, and credible. When he finished, the room was quiet. Ms. Voss made a note. Then she said, "Thank you, Mr. Hale. Before Mr. Ware presents his account, I would like to enter several items into the record." She nodded to Thomas Okeke. He placed a copy of the routing slip on the table. Clarence Webb was called forward. He walked to the front slowly, the way a man walks when he already knows what he is carrying. He set his notebook on the table and placed the routing slip beside it. Ms. Voss asked him to explain the notebooks. Clarence answered clearly. He described the system crash years earlier, his decision to keep parallel physical records, and his process for filing routing slips alongside daily entries. 14 years without interruption. Ms. Voss asked him to read the relevant entries aloud. He opened to the 14th of February and read the entry confirming the Whitmore order had entered standard process and that a physical routing slip had been issued. He turned to the 18th and read that the slip had been signed and returned. He placed his finger on the routing slip. "This is that slip. I filed it the same afternoon." The room was completely still. Ms. Voss picked up the slip and held it so the signature field was visible to the executives. "For the record," she said evenly, "the signature on this authorization form belongs to the department manager. The date is the 18th of February. She set it down and looked directly at Mr. Hale. His composure did not shatter immediately, but it shifted, like a wall that has not yet fallen but has just cracked at its base. Ms. Voss moved to the second piece of evidence. She presented the communication logs between Mr. Hale and Adrian Cross. She read key messages aloud, including the one where Cross described how a review queue entry could be removed without triggering an alert. She asked Mr. Hale to explain the context. He said they had been a general technical discussion. He had been asking informational questions, not issuing instructions. Ms. Voss asked why those messages occurred 2 days after the Whitmore failure became public, and not at any earlier date. Mr. Hale said he did not remember the exact timing. Ms. Voss then connected Adrian Cross by phone from another room. Cross, who had been informed the night before that the full communication record had been recovered, did not repeat Mr. Hale's explanation. In a barely steady voice, he said he had made the changes at Mr. Hale's direct request to remove the approval entry. The room went completely silent. Mr. Hale turned to look at Cross. And in that moment I saw something I had never witnessed in 11 years of working beside him. I saw the exact second a man realizes the story he built is no longer his to control. The expressions on the executives' faces told me everything I needed to know about what was coming next. Over the next 40 minutes, the hearing became something I had never witnessed at Hargrove. Ms. Voss and Thomas Okeke walked through the inconsistencies one by one with calm precision. Each point contradicted a specific claim Mr. Hale had made, not with opinion but with a document, a date, or a signature. The system log showed no approval request from me before the 18th. But Clarence's notebook showed a physical routing slip issued on the 14th, a slip that required an approval request to generate in the first place. Both records could not be accurate. One had been altered. My email record showed messages to Mr. Hale on the 13th, 15th, and 17th. His reply on the 18th said clearly, "Proceed as planned. I'll log the approval on Monday." That email, combined with the routing slip bearing his signature, showed he had authorized the order and simply failed to log it digitally. When the carrier caused a delay, instead of owning his oversight, he removed the evidence and redirected the failure onto me. The restructuring proposal filed 3 months earlier removed any remaining question about motive. Piece by piece, in front of the executives who had come expecting my removal, the story came apart at every joint. He stopped speaking halfway through and sat with both hands flat on the table. By the time Ms. Voss finished, the full picture was clear. Mr. Hale had authorized the Whitmore shipment both verbally and in writing on the 18th of February, having failed to enter a formal digital approval despite my 3 attempts to get his sign-off. When the shipment was delayed due to a carrier scheduling error, the kind that occurred several times each year and was almost never tied to the approval chain, he had seen an opportunity. He had wanted my role eliminated and had documented that intention formally 3 months earlier without success. Now he had a narrative that could achieve the same result. A senior coordinator who released a major shipment without authorization and cost the company a significant client relationship. All he needed was to remove his footprint from the approval record. He had accessed Hale and Cross, the log entry was deleted, and the chain appeared to stop at my desk. What he had not considered was Clarence and his notebooks. He had not considered Sandra and her memory. He had not considered that years of quiet integrity had produced in the people around me a habit of paying attention. The executives left the room to deliberate at 11:40. Mr. Hale did not look at me as they filed out. I did not try to make him. The executives returned at 1:15 in the afternoon. Ms. Eleanor Brand, VP of Operations, did the speaking. She was direct and wasted no words. The audit findings were clear and left no reasonable doubt about what had occurred. Deliberate alteration of company records was a serious breach of policy and professional ethics. The involvement of an IT systems employee in that alteration would be addressed through a separate process. Mr. Hale was placed on immediate administrative suspension pending a full disciplinary review and asked to leave the building before end of business. His access credentials were suspended on the spot. Hale and Cross was suspended as well. Then Ms. Brand turned to face me. She said my account had been fully corroborated by the physical and digital evidence. My professional conduct throughout the Whitmore process had been consistent with established procedure. The company apologized for the impact the investigation had had on my standing. She then said the company wished to discuss an expanded role with me at my earliest convenience, one reflecting my experience and the judgment I had demonstrated throughout a difficult situation. Sandra Ames, sitting 2 seats to my left, pressed her lips together and looked at the table. I think she was trying not to cry. Clarence Webb, near the door, gave one small, unhurried nod. 2 days later, an internal announcement went out company-wide. It said simply that a review of the Whitmore shipment had concluded, that all logistics coordination procedures had been found to be in compliance, and that changes would be made at the management level. Anyone who had been watching knew exactly what it meant. Over the following week, the social temperature shifted entirely in the opposite direction. People who had avoided my desk came by to say hello. Marcus, a coordinator I had trained 2 years earlier, brought coffee and said, "I never thought you were the problem. I just didn't know what to say." I told him not to worry about it. I meant every word. Sandra stopped by Wednesday. I told her that her statement had been the thread that gave the auditors something to pull. She said she had spent 3 nights barely sleeping after she submitted it. I asked how she felt now. She said she felt like herself again. Clarence was back in his narrow office, filing his notebooks. I went Thursday with a proper thank you and a firm handshake. He shook his head and said, "You did that for me once. I just evened the score." He smiled briefly and returned to work. My reputation had been fully restored, but I was already thinking about what came next. Ms. Brand met with me the following Monday morning. One-on-one, she was direct in a way I found genuinely refreshing after weeks of carefully coded language. She offered me the role of Operations Integrity Manager, a new position sitting between the floor coordination teams and senior management. It would involve oversight of approval processes, escalation protocols, and audit readiness across all regional distribution centers. A significant step up, a meaningful salary increase, a direct reporting line to her. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said, "I appreciate this offer and respect everything you have done to address what happened, but I need a few days to think." She looked surprised for just 1 second. Then she nodded. "Take the week." I walked out and stood in the hallway looking down toward the warehouse floor. 11 years of my life existed in that building. I knew its sounds and its smell and the exact way the light hit the loading dock at 4 o'clock. Something had shifted in me during those 2 weeks under accusation. The version of Daniel who absorbed pressure and stayed quiet had been tested to its absolute limit. What emerged on the other side was different, clearer about what I would and would not carry for other people. The decision ahead was entirely mine to make. I accepted the role, but I accepted it on terms I had never operated on before. Before signing anything, I put in writing a clear statement of conditions. Accountability would flow in both directions. Documentation would be maintained at every level, including above mine. Any escalation I raised in good faith would be reviewed without pressure to protect the comfort of those being reviewed. Ms. Brand read it and signed without changing a single word. On my first morning in the new role, I walked through the warehouse floor before the building had fully arrived. I stopped outside Clarence's office. He was already there, his current notebook open, pen moving in that careful, even hand. I watched him for a moment through the small window in the door. A man with a handwritten notebook and a locked cabinet had preserved the truth long enough for it to matter. Not because he planned to protect me, because habits built in good faith tend to become useful at exactly the moments they are most needed. I thought about the version of me that had spent years staying quiet to keep the peace. He had taught me patience. But he had also allowed someone to build structures of deception on top of his silence. The new version would not do that. Integrity leaves traces. In emails, in notebooks, in the memories of people you helped without expecting anything back. When the moment arrives where you need those traces, they are either there or they are not. Mine were there, and that made all the difference.